Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
Let's talk about AI agents. This won't be a super deep dive into AI agents. I would probably suggest that this is more like a 101, but this is something that's coming and fairly new, and it's kind of the next evolution of AI and how we use it. And so I want to talk a little bit about it, what it is, how to secure it, and then how Microsoft is actually using this in some of the solutions already. So before we get started, because we are going to talk a little bit about Microsoft, we might as well get the disclaimer out of the way. So Adam, if you'll go through our standard disclaimer.
Not very standard because I change it every week, I think, but the gist of it is Andy and I do both work for Microsoft in our field security sales organization. We do this show outside of work on our own time, and we self-fund the show. Things like our domains, recording platform, and so on. We recognize our privilege that our employer is a very open social media policy. For the most part, Microsoft people are allowed to have their own presence outside of work and share their own opinions. And Andy and I appreciate that and take advantage of that. Of course, however, we think our listeners and viewers should know, in the interest of transparency, who signs our paychecks, and that could potentially skew or color our commentary on anytime we're talking about our employer. So we just want you to be aware of that. Of course, we try to look at everything through an academic lens, talk about facts, what it can do, what it can't do, where we think it may go, because that's what's most beneficial to our listeners and viewers, of course. But it's one of those transparency things we think is really important and valuable as well. And also, our employer likes us to do that too. So this is Adam and Andy talking on behalf of the Blue Security Podcast, not necessarily on behalf of Microsoft, but just as the full transparency and awareness where we work and what we do as well. So with that, let's get on with AI agents.
All right. So let's talk about a little bit about what an AI agent is. So most people in the last couple of years that AI has been on the boom, how they've used AI is essentially just a prompt and receive kind of interaction. So I'm going to ask AI something, and then I receive the response, and that's pretty much been the experience for most people. But AI agents is now kind of that next evolution. How else can we use AI? And what agents are, they're essentially programs that are programmed to perceive their environment and make decisions or take actions to achieve a specific goal autonomously. And so they operate without human interaction or intervention. They can be classified on their specific characteristics. They could be reactive, they could be proactive, and they can operate in a fixed or dynamic environment. And so these are coming up, and Alex Simmons, who's one of our identity gurus, wrote an article recently, a blog that talks about the future of AI agents. And this kind of prompted my thinking about, why security practitioners need to start thinking about that. And his viewpoint is about the future of AI agents, and then also why OAuth must evolve in order to accommodate this stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But he writes that at Microsoft, we believe that in the next 12 to 24 months, things will fundamentally change in the AI agent space. So instead of just responding to requests, the agent systems will start to work independently. They spot problems, they suggest solutions, they can carry context across conversations. And this will start, the difference will be small at first, but when you start to notice your agent proactively helping you solve problems, that's when it's going to start evolving, and instead of just following simple instructions. So one of the things that Microsoft has done recently, which we'll kind of do a deeper dive into it, is we've launched a public preview of the new Conditional Access Optimizer agent. This is something that's going to be built in, and we're going to talk about that, but it's a multi-function agent that can help analyze an org's conditional access policy, identify security gaps, so on and so forth. So, and later in the show, we'll deep dive into that. But part of the issue that he's kind of prompted this blog is that he's calling out that OAuth 2 is not really built for this new scale of AI agents. It's great for task focused agents, but there's going to be more authorization requirements as agents get more autonomous. So it's a great read, some good thoughts here. There's nothing that like specifically we can do for OAuth today, but it's something that prompted me to think, hey, we're going to need to start thinking about this as security practitioners and then how to secure it. So one of the things that was in our trainings, I don't know if you had to do this, Adam, but the new training that we had to do for this year actually walked us through Copilot Studio, which is like a low code, no code, very similar to like Power Apps type UI, where you can build your own agents. You can actually prompt Copilot using just regular conversational language to ask it to build something for you, or you can walk through kind of like different drop downs to build an agent. And so you can do agents for a lot of different things, like for personal things. For example, I can have it summarize my emails or something like that, or summarize my team's chats. You can also feed it things like, here's, for example, what I want to do is build an agent for specific roadmap features for government. And so there's all this information all over the place. I could say, use this spreadsheet that are updated, by different people. And then I can ask the agent, hey, based on the sources that I've grounded you in, give me the roadmap for, Defender CSPM, or give me whatever in the government space. And so a lot of different ways to use it as you start thinking about it. But this also creates new attack surface and new things that we have to think about. So we'll talk about it a little bit next on how you might want to secure this. But any thoughts on AI agents as we talk through this first, Adam?
Definitely the next big buzzword in this AI hype train that we're all on right now. You'll hear agentic thrown around quite a bit as well. Definitely a hot topic. And I'll admit, as I have heard this, there's been a little bit of eye rolls from me, where it still has felt a bit like vaporware and a bit of something that's farther out than people are suggesting. I mean, it's like Elon Musk constantly saying that full self-driving is just around the corner for Tesla, which he's been saying for a decade, and yet they still keep running into things, and they're level 2 systems that require drivers to pay attention the whole time. They're nowhere close compared to like a Waymo, which actually can drive itself through the streets of San Francisco. However, what made it real for me was when we at Microsoft added agents to Security Copilot. And this is one of them we're going to talk about here in just a minute when we get into the Conditional Access Optimizer agent. We rolled out 6 of them, and then 5 with partners as well. And one of the demos I kind of walked through was to do triage of submissions to junk mail or spam or phishing or whatever for a security team, where an agent can go through and triage them and pull out which ones are most relevant and which ones are actually like people reporting that the New York Times email newsletter they signed up for is malicious or whatever, which people do all the time because they don't want it anymore and they don't want to unsubscribe or take the steps or whatever. That really lit up for me in terms of making it real and seeing a real world example where this solves a real pain point right now. Every security team has these kind of queues that are overwhelming, completely menial, not a good use of human ingenuity, human skill, and are ripe for automation, are ripe for simplification. And that was such a great example, and it's such a great demo. And it's not a flying car. This is something that's in public preview now today. Anyone listening to this could go spin up Security Copilot in your environment and could start that agent. To start evaluating your submissions from your users and whittle it down for you and highlight, here's the couple of them you should go look at. Now, what's interesting is there was an example where in the demo, email came in that was from this Contoso's LMS, their learning management system. And at the time, the agent didn't know that was their specific element. And so it still flagged some of the submissions as potentially true positives. And the way you can even coach the agent is in natural language, where you can go to it and say, this is our corporate approved learning management system. Emails involving this should not be considered malicious or undesirable messages moving forward. And the agent can learn from that and adopt that automatically. And what it really lights up for you, especially if you're someone who has done automation in the past, if you've written scripts for your organization, if you've built automation workflows and things like ServiceNow or Zendesk, and you're hearing me talk about this, you go, well, we already have, automations around that. The difference between like automations and agents, automations tend to be very fragile. There's only one or two people who know how to update them because they have to be familiar with the code and how it functions and what it calls out to. And if something changes, even minor, like the formatting of a subject line or a header, it can break those automations. They're very, very fragile. And yes, they can save a ton of time when you stick to that critical path and everything works exactly as designed. But the moment you get away from that, they fall apart. And here's another benefit of agents where they can dynamically respond to changes and pick them up, because as we've worked with large language models, one thing we know is this is both a blessing and a curse. They're non-deterministic, which means everything we've done in computing up until this point has been deterministic. It's 1 or 0, on or off. It's binary. And what drives people crazy about LLMs is you can give the same prompt and get different output because they're non-deterministic, because there's that entropy to them. Well, in a scenario like this, where that's desirable, where there could be some entropy in some of the inputs, and I would like you to be able to roll with those punches and still keep delivering the same results, that's where agents are awesome compared to existing automation. So hopefully I gave you a little bit of a tease here, and like, why should you care? Especially if you've done automation in the past and you can see some of the differences in what you've built versus what these can do for you. Because if you're thinking, that's not really anything new, it's new packaging of the same old thing, it's really not. And it has tremendous benefits above and beyond what we've done in the past. So yes, we are on the hype curve. Yes, I don't know if we've reached the trough of disillusionment quite yet, but we will get to the plateau of productivity soon enough. And these will, I am confident, be part of our workflows moving forward. And the benefit for security practitioners listening to the show, watching the show, is this gets you out of the business of doing the worst parts of your job. This is not something to be feared. This is something to be welcomed with open arms, because it gets you away from having to do the stuff that sucks in security. It's all of the repetitive, repetitious, menial, low effort, just undesirable work. And then you get to do the cool work instead. You get to investigate an actual potential true positive and figure that out and use what makes you so exceptional as a human. Especially, I think all of us in security recognize our jobs are pretty safe in the near term because it requires so much human ingenuity. But it sure would be great if we could get out of the business of doing the parts of our job we don't like. And that's what I think this represents and what's exciting.
Yeah, I actually didn't see all the other agents that we released. There's the one that you're talking about, the phishing remediation one. That one is considered a defender agent or security co-pilot agent. And then there's an Intune agent for vulnerability management. And then this Entra one that we're going to do a little deeper dive on. But yeah, this phishing one is actually really cool. I'll put a link in it in the show notes so that you can read through it. But it's exactly what you said, Adam. It triages false alerts and kind of kicks them out of the queue. And I can empathize with that because I remember my coworker, Nate Gardner, who works at the company, he's been on the show. He used to do all that by hand and have to edit, like look through every single submission, and he would do that by hand, and it would take him hours. It's just not a good use of time. So
he's too smart to be doing that. Really.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
This is, again, I hope I'm trying to just emphasize why this is exciting and why we don't need to fear this. On an infinite timeline, every job gets automated over time. But I think in cybersecurity, there's a lot that is going to require all of the strengths humans bring to the table for a long time to come. But man, if we could get out of the business of some of this not so fun stuff, that'd be great. Bring it on.
Yeah. Yeah, the vulnerability management one for the Intune agent is essentially you can run the agent, identify vulnerabilities, and then it'll remediate it for you based on, the vulnerability. So that's also, again, like, why are we like manually patching things and doing all sorts of stuff when this could be automated? So, we kind of talked about multiple different types of agents. There's the ones that, Microsoft is building into the solutions themselves. They're already there. And obviously they've, with SFI and everything, we're already securing the agents based on best practices. But, you can also build your own agents. So I talked about like building your own agent within Copilot Studio. There's also Azure AI Foundry, where developers might be, within your company might be building agents. And so there's going to be things that you want to think about when people are doing this within your organization. And instead of, I think the knee-jerk reaction with security is, okay, this is brand new, let's just block it, right? And that can be a limiter in people's productivity, right? It's also kind of a dampener on the excitement of new technology, and then all of a sudden where the security, police is coming through and cutting it off. And so there are ways that you can, build this into your security policy. AI agents that are created within Microsoft Copilot Studio and Azure AI Foundry are automatically assigned identities now within the Microsoft Entra directory. So that centralizes all of your agents and user management into that one directory that you already manage. Microsoft Purview data security and compliance controls also extend to any custom built AI apps with the new Purview SDK, and it's natively enabled for AI agents built with AI Foundry and Copilot Studio. And then also Microsoft Defender integrates AI security posture management recommendations and runtime threat protections directly into Azure AI Foundry. And so if you're using the Azure development tools for this, we've already now extended a lot of our security stack to it automatically, enabled by default, so you don't have to think about it too much. But if your developers or users are doing this with other tools, this is something that you're going to want to think about, like, sensitive data. How is the agent like identified and authenticated within your environment? And how is that data protected? So things to think about as this new frontier is coming in through.
Yeah, I do think this is an area, and this is why I love that I give the disclosure up front. I do believe Microsoft is differentiated in this space. And it's because Microsoft, I think it's yes, I work there, but I don't think it's unfair to say that Microsoft has led in enterprise deployment of AI technologies, has been kind of the frontier provider of that. And at the same time, what's been interesting is Microsoft has gone through, you've referenced SFI, Andy, the Secure Future Initiative, which we've talked about on this show many times, but is this multi-year engineering sprint involving thousands of full-time engineers assigned to this to effectively put security above all else, where we have CEO permission all the way down to prioritize security before new features, before backward compatibility, before a number of different topics. And the benefit of that is you have a company that's laser focused on security right now that is also a bleeding edge AI vendor. And I don't think there's anyone else in the game that can claim that. OpenAI is not a security company. Anthropic's not a security company. Perplexity's not a security company. Amazon's not a security company. Google is trying to get there, but the Wiz acquisition hasn't gone through yet. Yeah, they have Mandiant, but nobody is a security company to the level Microsoft is. And so there is the benefit of the security tooling is being built alongside the new features. They are being built hand in glove. And that is truly differentiated. And we're seeing this where I will just say in my day job, I have customers who have been resolute. We are AWS for life. Customer, stop even saying the word Azure to us. It's a dirty word to us. We don't want to hear it. And they have come to me and said, hey, we're building on Azure now. How do we secure all this AI stuff we're doing? Like, wait a minute. I thought you were AWS for life. What's going on? And they're like, well, you guys have the best AI tools to build on the planet. Nobody's close to you. We're going to start building AI stuff in Azure now. So it has opened doors to customers who previously didn't work with Microsoft. And a large reason why is because of the tooling for AI tools, but also that the security tools are built in and not bolted on. And I know I pitched there. I apologize. My day job bled into this. But I do think as security practitioners, look, facts are facts. And I don't think anyone else in the game has built as much control and capability around management and governance and security of AI technologies the way we have. I do think that's differentiated. And I think our listeners and viewers, you can take it with a grain of salt. The Microsoft sales guy said this on a podcast, but you can go do your own homework. And I think you'll find that I'm speaking the truth here. It's just kind of different right now in the industry. And you just look at where someone's focus is and it speaks to that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Conditional Access Optimizer agent.
Yes.
There are quite a few of these Microsoft agents. We talked about a few. There's a threat intelligence briefing one. There's also a purview one. And so we're identity folks. And so we like to talk about the identity stuff. I think conditional access is something that can get away from people having holes in your conditional access policy, that you might not be able to see. And so this agent kind of just analyzes all of your conditional access policies and then gives you recommendations. So a couple of prereqs here. You do need to have Entra IDP1, which gives you the ability to have conditional access policies. You have to have at least one security compute unit associated with Security Copilot. So it does require Security Copilot in order to run any of these agents. They are Security Copilot agents. And then you need to activate the Entra Conditional Access Optimizer agent. So you need to have the roles, RBAC role, Security Administrator, GA, and if you're using any of the device-based controls for compliance with conditional access, then you'll obviously need Intune as well. There's a bunch of limitations on the documentation that we'll link. One of the things that I think should be called out, because this is usually a best practice, is that you don't want to have an account that sets up the agent with the requirement that it has to be PIM activated in order for the permissions to happen. Because if it doesn't have the standing permissions, then the agent might fail for authentication. And the agent does run under that user that stands it up. And so you might want a separate user scoped specifically for these agents. And so again, this is a preview. This might change when it goes GA. Some other things, like when you start the agent, it can't be stopped and could take a few minutes to run. But once it runs, you'll be able to see like some key things. You'll look at all different policies. I think there's 6 of them here, specifically whether or not users' applications fall within conditional access policies for these. So one is require MFA. It'll identify users who aren't covered by an MFA policy, and it can update that policy. The agent can also enforce device-based controls like device compliance, app protection policies, and domain joined devices, blocking a legacy authentication. Any user accounts with legacy authentications are blocked from sign-in, so it can look at those conditions. Policy considerations, it'll look at your policies, identify any overlapping settings. So if you have more than one policy that grants the same controls, or something like that, it can suggest consolidating those policies. Blocking device code flow. This is something we talked about just recently.
Mm-hmm.
And it can look at any policies that should have blocking device code flow in there. And then it also has a one-click remediation. So if you have a suggestion, you can have the agent update that with just one click. To see this, you go to the Entra Admin Center, and there's a new tab on the side called Agents. And when you go to Agents, you can run it, and then stand it up obviously the first time. Then you can run it. You can have it run periodically as well, automatically if you want, or you can just do an ad hoc. And then it'll have recommendations. And before, if you're doing the one-click remediation, it'll give you a policy impact as well before you update it. So you can see, who's going to be impacted, what's going to happen before you impact it. And there's also, you can run it as a report only if you want. So a lot of different things. Again, I think is great. Obviously, we have that workbook too that shows you the conditional access gaps. But I think this is a little bit more user friendly. If you obviously it does require Security Copilot, but I think it's a little bit user friendly. You just run the agent, gives you the recommendations, one click remediation, and you're good to go. So really great for your identity protection.
Yeah, this is exciting. And conditional access policies often vex administrators because they work kind of backwards compared to, say, how firewall rules work. And so there's a bit of a learning curve to how they function, and being able to just give that guidance in a clear, summarized fashion and then solve it in one click is fantastic. And these are all things we've been encouraging customers to do. So I love for it to come out and be like, yo, you don't have MFA turned on for these people. I mean, like we say, that's table stakes. Device-based conditional access. Andy and I love device-based conditional access. Think it's great. Block legacy authentication. You should already be doing it. If you're not, why not? A block device code flow. We talked about it on this show. So like all of this stuff Really great. Policy consolidation just helps you wrap your mind around it from a human perspective too. So really great stuff here. And if it consumes less than one security compute unit, only when it's running, that's one security compute unit for an entire year is like $35,000. And that's the minimum bar to get to Security Copilot. You can add more if you need more. You can just do an overage based model if you'd rather just pay when you use it or when you need more. But this can fit into your existing footprint pretty easily because it's going to run the agent, do the evaluation, and not consume that security compute unit all of the time. So that's great stuff here. And then policy impact has been in Security Copilot for a while, where you can ask it, again, reactive versus proactive. You could say, hey, if I change this policy, what's the impact of it? And it can say, well, this will start impacting this many additional users, and it will require them to do X, Y, and Z. Now having that built into this flow makes perfect sense, and it's stitching all of those benefits together. So it's in public preview today. So there are a couple of, as you mentioned, Andy, caveats around kind of getting it stood up and how it works. I would expect those to get smoothed out before general availability. The one thing is, and I haven't seen the wizard to stand this up, but I mentioned I had walked through the demo of the phishing triage agent. And during the initial stand-up of the agent, it does offer to create an identity for the agent and automatically assign it with the correct RBAC controls it needs just to do what it does and nothing more. So out of the box, it'll stand up an agent, it'll start an identity, and then it will configure it with only the permissions it needs to do its job. And that's going to be, I think, a new frontier for security administrators moving forward are going to be agentic identities and managing their permissions and make sure they are set appropriately and scoped appropriately as well. So we are doing that out of the box optionally. You actually don't have to. You could pick a different identity to run the agent as well. And I didn't see how this one works, Andy. I think you said this one will run as your user context of the person who's standing it up. So that might be a bit different. But all these agents were built by different teams, Defender team, Entra team, Intune team, and so on. So you probably will see some differences in approach initially. And I would imagine those will converge over time as we learn what works best. One of the things about public preview is it exposes us as Microsoft to new information on how things work in the real world. And we find the edges, the rough edges, different use cases we hadn't considered, different scenarios where customers wanted to fit into their existing concepts and infrastructure and so on. So more to come here for sure. But hey, this is something you can certainly kick the tires on today. If you're not a Security Copilot customer, it's a consumption-based model, so you can turn it up for a couple hours. It's literally $4 an hour. And then you could turn it off. So you could test this out literally for tens of dollars, which I think even at the most cash-strapped organization could fund that to give things like this a shot and see what you're missing out on and maybe what you want to put in the budget for the future.
Yeah, I tried to walk through the stand-up for it, but I didn't have Security Copilot in my demo tenant, and then in the one that I do have access to, didn't have the permissions to do it. So maybe it does offer to create an identity for you as well. I would assume that feels like something that we would do. So maybe someone else who's walked through the wizard can give us a heads up on that. But it's great that the phishing one does offer to create a specific identity for the agent, which makes sense.
And that's the default behavior. It's already checked. If you click next, that's what it'll do.
Perfect. All right. Well, that's our show for this week. I had a great conversation around AI agents and some of the things that we're doing at Microsoft with security around those. We'll put all the links to the documentation as well as anything that we refer to in the show notes, as well as our contact information if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJBrewer. See you at our next episode.